spiritual and emotional fuel tank filled up. And Jesus talks to her about a lot of things. But let's not miss the truth that one of the important things Jesus talks to this woman about is about worship. How do you get filled up? How do you fill up your spiritual and emotional gas tank? Worship. Which brings us to our question of the day, though. Why worship? We show up, we come. You think about every single week, not only here at Grandview, but in other churches. There's people that work behind the scenes. We pull together all the pieces. We set up all of the chairs. How many chairs are set up this week, Robin? 250?
Yes.
250 chairs. We set up all the chairs, get them arranged just right. Then we get the sound and the lights and the heat just right. The cooling in the summer, we get that all put together just right. We pick out the music. We determine the order of worship. We print the bulletins. We decide on the message, myself and primarily myself. I talk it over with the dream team. Then we produce and put together what you see up on the screen, myself and Ann Lorenz. We put that all together, and then we get ushers and we get greeters and we get children's church people and we get people to do the coffee and we get people to do the cookies and to clean it up afterwards. We do all these things every single week. Are you with me? And you go, wow, that's a lot of work. And you would be right. And I'm not telling you that to say, wow, isn't that something? I'm doing that. Maybe you don't realize how much goes into every single week's worship, Wednesday night and Sunday. There's a lot of work and a lot of people are involved, which again pushes on the question of the day, though. Why? Have you ever thought deeply about why? Why you're here today? If you look at that, for some people, they come to worship either on Wednesday or on Sunday morning out of a sense of duty, out of a sense of obligation. Or some people, I said this Wednesday night at Wednesday worship, we had a big crowd Wednesday, and I think I might have hit a nerve. Because I said, maybe some of you are here to worship on Wednesday night because you made a deal with whoever you came to worship with that you'd go get a piece of pie at Village Inn afterwards. Yikes, that's like meddling, But seriously, why are you here? Some people come to worship out of obligation, or out of a sense of duty, or out of a sense that they're going to get a check mark on God's clipboard that says you're good to go for another week just by showing up. I read this weekend, my wife Alana has a subscription to ESPN magazine, as many of you know. You can imagine. It's true. Where is she? It's true. Yeah. I'm telling the truth, aren't I? Yeah, it's addressed to Alana Schinkel, 665. So she lets me read it. Sometimes I pass it on. I give one to Terry. Yeah. I was reading in the ESPN, the magazine, and it was interviewing a player for the Detroit Lions talking about this great quote. He was talking about how in the weight room of the Detroit Lions facility, there's a big sign, and it says this: don't confuse routine with commitment. Isn't that a great quote? Why are you here at worship? Is it routine? And again, to push further on that, it's to say that routine, duty, obligation is not necessarily the same thing as being committed to God. Fair enough? Don't confuse commitment and routine. So let's go a little deeper. Why are you here? Are you here to take time to be with God? Or are you here because you needed cheered up? You needed a warm fuzzy? Are you here out of guilt? Are you here out of anger? Are you here for moral edification? Are you here for intellectual stimulation? Are you here to maybe hear some interesting information? Are you here to see what happens next? Are you here for fellowship and friendship? Are you here for something to do because the Super Bowl doesn't start till 5:20 and there's nothing good on TV? I don't know. Only you can answer this. Why are you in worship? We do this every week. But again, you may not think deeply or at all about why you do this, about why or what it is that you're after. And so again, that's why we talk about worship. Throughout the whole Bible, I mentioned this already, throughout the whole Bible, God's people should be worshiping. There's so many scriptures and so many examples, I can't even touch on them all. Let's just, believe me, you read it, you'll come out at the same place. Throughout the whole Bible, we are ordered, we're commanded, we're invited, all these things by God to worship. And then today in the gospel lesson, we read that Jesus says that worship is really important. He says to this woman who's running on empty and who is in need of transformation, who's in need of her life to be different, he says to her about worship. He talks to her about worshiping in spirit and in truth. In fact, here's a really important point. Jesus says this, that worship is not confined to a particular place or even particular rituals. Jesus says worship is not confined to a particular place or even particular ritual, but we're supposed to worship in spirit and in truth. So that's when he said, worship on this mountain, worship in Jerusalem. Jesus said, no, the time is coming. That's not going to matter. So you unpack that, and Jesus is saying, it doesn't matter where, and it doesn't matter the rituals. Jesus is saying, it doesn't matter whether you're in a brick and mortar building. It doesn't matter whether you are in a building that has a cross and a flame, or a symbol for Lutheran, or a Lutheran church, or a non-denominational. Jesus says it doesn't matter whether you worship with a loud screaming guitar, a saxophone, or an organ. See, some people really still are having a hard time understanding. They think somehow, some way, Jesus commanded that we have to sing with an organ and hymnals, and the choir has to wear robes. You know what I'm talking about? And some people still haven't gotten over the fact that Jesus did not say that. Are you with me? Jesus said it doesn't matter where, and it doesn't matter your particular rituals. Whether you take communion with a loaf of bread like this, or flatbread, or little communion wafers, whether you have a cup or whether you have little glasses, it doesn't matter. Don't get hung up on it. Don't use it as something to separate you. Jesus says it's about worshiping in spirit and in truth. And the context of talking to the Samaritan woman who had many idols and many false gods in her culture, Jesus was saying this. Now listen, he was saying, where you worship does not matter, but who you worship is a matter of life and death. Amen? You with me? I want to make sure you're still with me. Jesus said, where you worship. And I expand on that and say, whether you wear a suit and tie, or you have on t-shirt and blue jeans or shorts, whether you have a guitar and drums or an organ or a symphony orchestra, where you worship and the rituals you use does not matter, but who you worship is a matter of life or death. That's important. As you consider why you worship, it's important to get that part right first, about who's receiving the glory. And that's part of our challenge, I believe, for all of us. Not just you, me too, all of us. Part of our challenge is that we sometimes forget the who part, you know? We sometimes forget the who we are to worship part. And it doesn't mean we're bad. It doesn't mean we're rotten, no good people. It means we're broken human beings, and we sometimes mistakenly believe that worship is about us. Now you may be thinking, oh, no, I don't. Really? You ever walked out of here saying, I didn't like the sermon that much? You ever said that? I know. That's how I handle it. Tough. Keep listening. Sometimes we mistakenly say, well, I didn't like worship so much today because we didn't sing my favorite songs. Huh? We forget sometimes that worship's not about us, it's about who? God. But we say things like, well, I didn't really get anything out of worship today because that preacher just talked forever and we were there for an hour and 10 minutes. Sometimes we say things like, well, I just don't go to church that much because I'm not that cheered up after I leave. Or we say things like, what did worship do for me? See, that's the evidence. Do we sometimes forget the who of worship? Do we sometimes forget who worship is about when we ask questions like, what did worship do for me? People have left the church, and I've heard them say, well, I just didn't really get anything out of worship. Really? It always amazes me that people leave their church family and the people they've made a promise to love, but that's another story. It's like this. It's like the wrong question. In fact, I think Jesus would even say to us, those are the wrong questions. When we ask things like, did I like the sermon? Did I like the songs? Did it last too long? Did I get anything out of it? I think Jesus would say, that's the wrong question. You know what the right question is? Are you ready? What did you do for God at worship today? That's the right question. What did you do for God at worship today? Whether you liked the songs or liked the sermon and thought it went too long, that's why I was being kind of a smart aleck and saying tough, but here's my basis of that. It's not about you. It's about what did you bring to God. If you want to know what worship's about, why are you here? Well, this is what it should be about. Did you thank Him? Did you praise Him? Did you come to worship and pay attention to the movement of God's Spirit? Did you come and sing to God? Whether you can sing on key or off key, doesn't matter. Thank goodness. Doesn't matter. What did you do? What did you bring? What did you give? Did you listen to God speak through the music? Did you listen to God speak through the preacher or the scriptures or the prayers? Did you bring something to worship? That's the right question. See, the Apostle Paul connects worship to sacrifice. Of all things, that reading from Romans is not about come into worship and just sit back. Man, relax. Be entertained. Sit passively. Why do you think I constantly ask you things like, are you with me? You know why? I want you to be involved. Don't be sitting there, planning your to-do list and how you're going to sneak out to Menards with your big cart and buy stuff, or is that just me? No! Be here.